Outdoor Adventure Center, here today from my local park, once again for Woodland Wildflowers Part 2. It's a little bit later in May now, and many of the spring ephemerals that we looked at for Wildflowers Part 1 are now starting to fade and give way to some of the later spring wildflowers. So we'll take a look at some of those special woodland beauties today. So a look at our woodlot during this time here in southeast Michigan, which is mid to late May. Lots of our leaves are starting to come out, as opposed to our Wildflowers Part 1 video, which practically had no leaves on the trees at that time in April. So if we take a look at the forest floor here, some of the plants that are starting to emerge are those that tolerate shade, the conditions that the woods will be for the rest of the summer. Some of our trout lily leaves, though, are still visible, and remember that plant was so prominent during our first video, but now the leaves are starting to yellow, like, let's see, this one right here, and they'll soon fade away and go back down into the dirt until next spring. The plant growing here as sort of a ground cover here on the woodland floor with cute little sort of heart-shaped leaves might not be the most striking woodland wildflower at first glance. However, let's take a closer look to the base of the flower. Look what we found. The wild ginger flower is very close to the ground, actually underneath the leaves. You have to move the leaves back to find this beautiful deep red flower. So it's thought that pollinators of this plant are actually those that spend most of their time on the ground, and those that may be sort of attracted to raw meat or rotting meat. Notice the deep red color of the flower. So think maybe flies and beetles as opposed to bees as pollinators for this plant. A look at this woodland floor here reveals a few soft splashes of purple. Let's take a closer look. Wild geranium is a beautiful and common member of the shady deciduous woodland. It has 5 purplish round petals and deeply divided leaves at the base of the flowers. Watch for this common late spring wildflower if you take a walk in the woods during this season. This is definitely one of the more unique looking flowers of Michigan woodlands here. First, let's just look at the leaves. There are 3 leaflets at the top and a single stem that the leaflets come out of. And then next to that is another stem, and the flower will actually develop inside this pulpit here. And the club that you see there is called the jack, and it's covered by this hood. So maybe you've heard this wildflower before. It's called Jack-in-the-Pulpit. There's the jack, here's the pulpit, and it's covered by a hood. Sometimes it has kind of a reddish color on the outside. You can kind of see that color on the inside of the hood here, but definitely one of the more unique flowers of our woodlands. Pretty common, actually. You just have to look kind of closely for it as you're walking on the trail. This one I like to call the umbrella plant. The leaves do form sort of an umbrella shape over the surface that they cover. And they do often grow in thick clusters, creating a bunch of woodland umbrellas together. This plant is called Mayapple, and that refers to the time that the plant is in flower. This plant can be one stem with just an umbrella and no flower, like this one here. But let's find one that has two stems. So it starts off with just one stem at the base, and then the stems part and form a Y. It has two umbrellas actually, and of course that beautiful pure white flower in the center. Sometimes the mayapple is considered an edible plant, but you always have to be careful with this because every part of this plant is actually toxic except for the fruit that forms later in the summer from this flower. So always be cautious when studying edible plants. These next two species are very similar, but a close look at their flower placement reveals their differences. So both of these species have alternating leaves on sort of a wavy stem, but let's look at where the flower cluster is on this plant. It's right here at the end of the stem. The flowers aren't open yet, but a little bit later in the spring, they'll open up as a cluster of small whitish flowers. This species is called false Solomon seal. So if there's a false Solomon seal, there must be a real Solomon seal. So let's take a look at that one. So here's the real Solomon seal. Actually, this is also called smooth Solomon seal. And it's different from our false Solomon seal that we met because of the flower placement. Notice there's no flowers at the tip of the stem. So where are they? Like some other species around here, you have to look under the leaves. So if we lift the leaves up, there they are, hanging underneath the leaves, pointed downward. Smooth Solomon seal. So just like our false Solomon seal, it has alternating leaves on sort of a wavy stem. These leaves are a little bit more delicate though, and that stem's a little bit skinnier. But look at those beautiful flowers hanging underneath the stem here. Smooth Solomon seal. So let's end with a true beauty of Michigan's springtime woodlands, the large flowered Trillium. It's unmistakable with its 3 white petals, 3 sepals, and 3 leaves. Is it white or is it pink? Well, that depends on how long the Trillium has been flowering. The longer the Trillium flowers, it turns more and more pink. You can see that the pinkish ones here are really starting to fade. So the freshest, we could say, Trillium flowers are the ones you see that are still pure white. So unfortunately, there certainly are threats to this delicate woodland ecosystem, and one of them here is this plant shown here. This is garlic mustard, and the way that you would identify it is it has small white flowers with 4 petals, and some of them are actually forming seed pods here. The leaves are toothed and sort of heart-shaped, and if you take a little bit of it off, crumble it in your fingers, and take a whiff, guess what it smells like? It's kind of garlicky. Actually, it is an edible plant that was brought over here from Europe, but it has escaped into our woodlands and is actually quite the invader. So what can you do to keep this woodland healthy and free of invasive species like garlic mustard? It may not be possible to eradicate the invasive species completely, but we can take some steps to reduce their spread. First, make sure you stay on the trail whenever you take a hike. You may have pollen or seeds from invasive species stuck to your shoes and not even know it. So if you're going off the trail, even to look at a wildflower, you could be spreading invasive species. Also, you might want to volunteer with a local nature conservancy or park that does invasive species removals. Garlic mustard is often removed by lots of volunteers who are looking to do some good work for their park. If you're interested in learning more about Michigan's woodland wildflowers, or any wildflowers for that matter, these 3 books are a great place to start. Wildflowers of Michigan, Peterson Guide to Eastern Wildflowers, and the Newcomb's Wildflower Guide. For the very beginner, I would probably recommend the Wildflowers of Michigan book. Thanks everyone for joining me today here in my local park for Spring Woodland Wildflowers Part 2, and we'll see you next time. Thanks!